I'm a citizen. Please call my dad.
Yeah, that's what they all say, sweetheart. Keep moving.
The metal handcuffs clicked around 16-year-old Amina Hassan's wrists as IC agents dragged her through the crowded hallway of Lincoln High School. Students pressed against lockers, phones raised, recording every second. Teachers shouted protests, but the agents didn't stop. Amina's voice cracked with desperation as tears streamed down her face beneath her hijab. I'm a citizen. Please call my dad. I'm a United States citizen. Agent Brennan, a stern-faced white man in his early 30s, barely glanced at her. Yeah, that's what they all say, sweetheart. Keep moving. 300 miles away, in a secure conference room at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, a decorated military general stood at attention, his phone pressed to his ear. General Marcus Hassan's face, normally composed and commanding, darkened with an fury that made his aides step back. They thought she was just another undocumented teen. They had no idea her father was about to turn their entire operation upside down. But let's back up. Let's talk about who Amina Hassan really was, because this wasn't just any teenager being ripped from her school. This was a girl who represented everything America claimed to stand for. That same morning, just 6 hours earlier, Amina had walked through those same hallways with a brightness in her eyes that came from someone who genuinely loved learning. At 16, she carried herself with a quiet confidence that came from knowing exactly who she was and where she was going. Her hijab was pinned neatly, and on her jacket lapel she wore a small American flag pin. Not the cheap kind you get at parades, but a carefully chosen one. Her father had given it to her on her 13th birthday, the same year her mother passed away. He'd told her, "Never forget, Amina. This is your country too. You have every right to be here, to thrive here, to make it better." Amina Hassan wasn't just any student at Lincoln High. She was captain of the debate team, the girl who could argue constitutional law with the precision of a seasoned attorney. Straight A's didn't come close to describing her academic record. She tutored younger students after school, spent her weekends volunteering at the local refugee center, helping new arrivals navigate the very system that would soon turn against her. Georgetown University had already sent her an interview invitation. Next week, she was supposed to sit down with admissions officers and talk about her dream of becoming a civil rights attorney. Her best friend Maria, a bright-eyed Latina girl with a quick laugh, had been joking with her that morning. They were in AP government together, and they had a presentation due on constitutional rights. The irony would become painfully clear in just a few hours. "Amina, girl, we're going to kill this presentation," Maria had said, bumping her shoulder playfully. "Fourth Amendment protections against unreasonable search and seizure? We got this." Amina had laughed, adjusting her backpack. "You know me, I live for this stuff. Due process, equal protection, the whole Bill of Rights is basically my love language." What Maria didn't know, what none of her classmates knew, was the weight Amina carried. Born in Minneapolis General Hospital 16 years ago, she'd never even left the United States. Never needed a passport because she'd never been anywhere else. Her parents had fled Somalia years before her birth, her mother Fatuma escaping a country torn apart by civil war. But Amina? Amina was American. Minneapolis-born, Minnesota-raised, completely and utterly American. Third period was AP Calculus. Amina was working through a derivative problem when the intercom crackled to life. "Amina Hassan, please report to the principal's office immediately." Students glanced at her, some smirking, some curious. She gathered her books, gave Maria a confused shrug and headed down the hallway. She'd never been called to the office before. Perfect attendance, perfect behavior, perfect record. When she pushed open the door to Principal Kowalski's office, everything changed. Two men in dark suits stood near the window. Principal Kowalski, a usually friendly man with graying hair and kind eyes, looked pale and uncomfortable. He wouldn't meet Amina's gaze. "Amina," one of the men said, stepping forward. He was Latino, probably in his mid-40s, with a by-the-book demeanor that screamed federal agent. "I'm Agent Rodriguez. This is Agent Brennan. We need you to come with us." Amina's heart started racing. "What? What's happening? Did something happen to my dad?" Agent Brennan moved closer, and there was something in his eyes, something cold that made her skin crawl. He was younger, white, with an aggressive stance that felt more like a predator than a protector. "Amina Hassan, we have reason to believe you're in this country illegally. We need to take you in for status verification." The words didn't make sense. They literally didn't compute in Amina's brain. "What? No, there's some mistake. I'm a citizen. I was born here. I was born in Minneapolis." Agent Rodriguez pulled out a folder. "We'll verify that at our facility. You need to come with us now." Amina's debate training kicked in, the same skills that had won her 3 state championships. Am I under arrest? Do you have a warrant? Under what legal authority are you detaining me? Principal Kowalski finally spoke up, his voice shaking. Agents, please, this is highly unusual. Amina is one of our best students. Can't we call her father first? He's a military officer, he can verify everything. Brennan cut him off with a dismissive wave. Sir, this is a federal matter. We don't need permission to verify immigration status. He turned back to Amina, his patience clearly wearing thin. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. You can cooperate or we can do this the difficult way. Amina's hands trembled as she reached for her phone. I want to call my father. I have rights. I'm a United States citizen and I know my rights. That's when Brennan grabbed her wrist. Not roughly but firmly enough to make his point. Phone stays here. Let's go. Rodriguez at least had the decency to look uncomfortable. Amina, we just need a few hours to verify your documentation. Once we confirm everything, you'll be released. This is standard procedure. But it wasn't standard. Nothing about this was standard. As they led her through the hallway, students started pulling out their phones. Teachers emerged from classrooms, voices rising in protest. Mrs. Chin, her debate coach, actually tried to block the doorway. You can't just take her. She's a minor. Where are her parents? Brennan flashed some kind of paperwork, barely giving anyone time to read it. Federal agents. Step aside. The handcuffs came out in the parking lot. Cold metal against Amina's brown skin, clicking shut with a finality that made her stomach drop. Students were everywhere now, filming, shouting, some crying. Maria was screaming from a second-floor window. Amina, we're calling your dad. We're calling everyone. Amina's voice broke as they pushed her into the back of a black SUV. I'm a citizen. Please call my dad. Someone call my dad. The door slammed shut. Through the tinted window she could see her school, her friends, her life, getting smaller as they pulled away. She thought about the American flag pin on her jacket, now sitting in an evidence bag. She thought about her Georgetown interview next week. She thought about her presentation on constitutional rights. And she thought about what her father always told her. America is built on laws, Amina. Laws that protect everyone equally. In that moment, sitting in the back of that SUV, those words felt like a lie. 300 miles away, General Marcus Hassan was in the middle of a classified briefing. Fort Bragg's strategic operations room was filled with military brass, maps spread across tables, discussions of counterterrorism operations in progress. Marcus Hassan commanded respect the moment he entered any room. At 52, he was a decorated black American officer with 25 years of distinguished service. 3 tours in Iraq, 2 in Afghanistan, commendations for valor, strategic brilliance that had saved countless American lives. He'd grown up in Detroit, the son of a factory worker and a nurse, joined the military right after September 11th when he was 27 years old, determined to serve the country he loved. The military had been his path out of poverty, his chance to prove himself, and he'd seized it with both hands. Through sheer excellence, through late nights studying strategy, through leading men and women with integrity and courage, he'd climbed from enlisted soldier to general officer. His peers respected him. His subordinates would follow him anywhere. And his country had rewarded his service with medals, with rank, with honor. His personal life had been equally meaningful, though marked by tragedy. During a humanitarian mission overseas 15 years ago, he'd met Fatuma, a Somali refugee working as a translator for American forces. She'd been brilliant, compassionate, fluent in 4 languages, with a smile that could light up the darkest forward operating base. They'd fallen in love surrounded by the chaos of war, finding something beautiful in the midst of horror. When Marcus returned stateside, he'd helped her navigate the legal immigration process. She came to America the right way, with paperwork, with visas, with every stamp and signature the system required. They married in a small ceremony in Minneapolis, blending his Detroit family with her Somali community. Amina was born a year later, a perfect baby girl with her mother's eyes and her father's determination. For 13 years they were a complete family. Marcus would come home from deployments to find Fatuma teaching Amina Somali while helping her with American history homework, determined that their daughter would honor both heritages. Then cancer came, swift and merciless. Fatuma fought for 18 months before passing away 3 years ago, leaving Marcus and Amina to figure out life without her. Amina became his entire world. Every deployment request he considered how it would affect her. Every decision, every choice filtered through one question: what's best for my daughter? She was his pride, his joy, his reason for believing that America could still be the place of opportunity and justice it claimed to be. So when his aide, Lieutenant Morrison, interrupted the briefing with an urgent call, Marcus was annoyed. "General, I'm sorry, but it's Lincoln High School. They say it's about Amina. It's urgent." Marcus stepped out of the room, phone to his ear, expecting maybe she was sick, maybe there'd been an incident. Principal Kowalski's voice was shaking. "General Hassan, I don't know how to tell you this. ICE agents came to the school. They took Amina. They said she's being detained for status verification." The words didn't register at first. Marcus actually laughed, a short, confused sound. "What? No, there must be some mistake. My daughter is a United States citizen. She was born in Minneapolis General Hospital. I have her birth certificate, her social security card, everything." Kowalski's voice cracked. "Sir, I know. I tried to tell them. They wouldn't listen. They took her anyway. The students filmed it. It's already going viral on social media." Marcus Hassan felt something crack inside his chest. Not panic, not yet. He was too well trained for panic. But a cold, controlled fury began spreading through his veins. "What do you mean they took her? Where did they take her?" Kowalski gave him an address for the local ICE processing facility. "General, I'm so sorry. I tried to stop them. But they had paperwork and they said it was a federal matter." Marcus ended the call and stood in the hallway of Fort Bragg, in his full uniform with his stars gleaming on his shoulders, medals earned in blood and sacrifice decorating his chest, and for the first time in 25 years of military service, he felt completely powerless. His daughter, his American-born daughter, had been taken. Snatched from her school like a criminal, handcuffed, terrified. And he hadn't been there to protect her. He pulled out his phone again, dialing his lawyer with shaking hands. Patricia Okafor, a brilliant Nigerian-American attorney and fellow colonel in the Judge Advocate General's Corps, answered on the second ring. "Marcus? What's wrong?" His voice was steady but barely. "Patricia, ICE just detained my daughter. I need you to meet me at their processing facility in 30 minutes. Bring every piece of documentation we have. Birth certificate, social security card, everything." Patricia's sharp intake of breath told him she understood the gravity. "Your daughter? Amina? But Marcus, she's a citizen." Marcus was already moving toward his car, long strides eating up the hallway. "I know. They don't care. I'm heading there now." Patricia's voice turned professional, the lawyer in her taking over. "Don't go in hot, Marcus. I know you're angry. I know you're scared. But military rank doesn't have jurisdiction over civilian immigration enforcement. If you go in there making demands, throwing your weight around, it could make things worse." Marcus reached his car, a practical sedan that Amina had helped him pick out last year. Her debate team sticker was still on the bumper. He gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white. "Patricia, they put my daughter in handcuffs. They took her from her school. I've served this country for 25 years, and they treat my child like she's a criminal?" Patricia's voice was gentle but firm. "I know, and we're going to fix this. But we do it smart. We do it legal. Meet me there and let me handle the initial contact. Can you do that?" Marcus closed his eyes, forcing himself to breathe, to think like the strategic commander he was. Emotion was the enemy right now. Clear thinking would save his daughter. "Okay. 30 minutes. He started the car, and as he pulled out of Fort Bragg, his mind raced through everything he knew about immigration law, federal authority, constitutional rights. And he kept seeing Amina's face, remembering her as a little girl, sitting on his shoulders at his promotion ceremony to general, so proud of her dad in his uniform, waving a little American flag. If you're watching this and thinking this can't be real, that this couldn't happen in America, hit that subscribe button because this story is just getting started. What happens next will shock you. The question is, if this happened to your daughter, your son, your family member, what would you do? Would you fight the system or would you trust it to correct itself? Drop your answer in the comments below, because this is a conversation we need to have. General Marcus Hassan was about to find out just how far he'd have to go to get his daughter back. And the answer would shake the entire immigration enforcement system to its core. The black SUV pulled up to a nondescript concrete building on the outskirts of town. ICE processing facility, the sign read in cold bureaucratic letters. For Amina Hassan, walking through those doors felt like entering a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. Her hands were still cuffed behind her back, the metal digging into her wrists. Agent Brennan gripped her arm, not roughly, but with enough firmness to remind her she had no choice in what happened next. Inside, the facility was exactly what you'd expect from a government processing center. Fluorescent lights that made everything look sickly and pale. Gray walls. The smell of industrial cleaner barely masking something else, something that spoke of fear and desperation. A bored-looking officer sat behind bulletproof glass at the intake desk. "Another one?" she asked, not even looking up from her computer. Brennan nodded. "Status verification. Amina Hassan. Somali national, suspected fraudulent documentation." Amina's voice cracked. "I'm not a Somali national. I'm American. I was born in Minneapolis." The intake officer finally looked at her, and there was such complete indifference in her eyes that Amina felt something break inside. This woman had seen 1,000 faces like hers, heard 1,000 similar claims and believed none of them. We'll verify that. Empty your pockets." They took everything. Her phone, her wallet with her student ID and the $20 her dad had given her for lunch that week, her house keys, even the hair tie from her wrist. But they missed one thing. The small American flag pin on her jacket. It was subtle enough that it didn't register as something that needed confiscating. Amina's fingers brushed against it as they led her down a long hallway, and she held on to it like a lifeline. The holding room was worse than she'd imagined. It wasn't a cell, not technically, but it might as well have been. Concrete benches lined the walls. About 15 women and girls sat there in various states of distress. Some were crying quietly. Others stared at the floor with the hollow eyes of people who'd given up hope. A few were trying to sleep on the hard benches, using wadded-up jackets as pillows. The door locked behind Amina with a metallic clang that echoed in the small space. A girl around her age looked up. She was small, with long dark hair and eyes red from crying. "First time?" she asked in accented English. Amina nodded, not trusting her voice. The girl patted the bench beside her. "Sit. I'm Fatima. I've been here since yesterday." Amina sat down, her legs suddenly weak. "I'm Amina. But I shouldn't be here. I'm a citizen. This is a mistake." Fatima's smile was sad and knowing. "We all say that at first." Amina shook her head. "No, you don't understand. I was born here. In Minneapolis. I have a birth certificate, social security number, everything." Fatima pulled her knees to her chest. "I came here when I was 3. From Guatemala. My parents brought me. I don't remember Guatemala at all. I've lived in Texas my whole life, went to American schools, speak English better than Spanish. But I don't have papers. You know what that means? It means this is real for me. But you, if you really are a citizen, they'll figure it out." Something in Fatima's voice, a bitter resignation, made Amina realize how privileged her panic was. At least she had documentation. At least she had proof. But looking around the room at these women and girls, she wondered how many of them had similar stories to Fatima. How many of them thought of America as home, regardless of what their paperwork said. A processing officer walked by, a middle-aged white woman with a clipboard and the same dead-eyed indifference as everyone else who worked here. Amina jumped up. "Excuse me, I need to make a phone call. I'm entitled to a phone call." The officer didn't even slow down. "You'll get processed when it's your turn." Amina's voice rose, desperation making her bold. "I need to call my father. He's a military general. He can verify everything. Please just let me make one call." The officer stopped, turned, and looked at Amina with something that might have been amusement. "Everyone's got a story, honey. Your dad's a general?" "Sure he is. And my dad's the president. You'll wait your turn like everyone else." She walked away and Amina felt the fight drain out of her. She sank back onto the bench next to Fatima, who squeezed her hand. "They don't listen. They don't care. The faster you accept that, the easier this gets." But Amina couldn't accept it. Wouldn't accept it. An elderly woman across the room spoke up, her voice carrying the weight of experience and exhaustion. Her name was Rosa, and she looked like someone's grandmother, with gray hair and kind eyes that had seen too much suffering. "Mija, listen to me. I've been here 3 days. 3 days of telling them I'm a legal resident, that I have a green card, that my paperwork is at home. They don't care about the truth. They care about numbers, about quotas, about processing people through the system as fast as possible." Amina felt panic rising in her throat. 3 days? But they can't. I have school tomorrow. I have a college interview next week. I have a life. Rosa's expression was sympathetic but firm. "We all have lives, Mija. Or we did before we ended up here." Another woman, younger, maybe in her 30s, chimed in. "I'm Sarah. I'm actually a U.S. citizen too. Born in Arizona. But my parents are from Mexico, and apparently that was enough to flag me in their system. I've been here 2 days and they keep saying they're verifying my status." Amina looked at Sarah, at Rosa, at Fatima, at all these faces, and a terrible realization washed over her. This wasn't about documentation. This wasn't about following the law. This was about how you looked, what your name sounded like, whether you fit someone's idea of what an American should be. She thought about her debate team, about all those presentations on constitutional rights and due process. She'd studied these laws, memorized them, argued them passionately in competitions. And now she was learning that for some people, those rights were just words on paper. Hours crawled by. They were given water in paper cups and a sandwich that tasted like cardboard. Amina couldn't eat. Her stomach was twisted in knots. She kept replaying the moment in the principal's office, wondering if she could have said something different, done something different. Her debate coach had always taught her that the right argument, delivered the right way, could change minds. But Agent Brennan hadn't cared about her arguments. He'd already decided who she was the moment he saw her name, her hijab, her brown skin. She was finally called for processing. A different officer, a young Latino man who looked barely older than her, took her fingerprints. He rolled each of her fingers across the digital scanner with mechanical efficiency. Then photographs. Front view. Side view. Like she was a criminal, like she'd done something wrong. Amina felt humiliation burning in her chest. "I'm a citizen," she said quietly. The officer didn't respond. He'd heard it before. He'd hear it again. It meant nothing to him. As she was led back to the holding room, she passed by an open office door. 2 agents were inside, and she recognized Brennan's voice. "The Hassan girl, you really think she's illegal?" another voice asked. Brennan scoffed. "Look at her name. Somali. They always claim to be citizens, but half the time the documents are fake. Refugee communities, they know how to work the system. Birth certificates, social security cards, all of it can be forged." Amina stopped walking, and the officer escorting her had to pull her along. But she'd heard enough. They'd already decided. Before verifying anything, before checking any databases, they'd looked at her name, her appearance, and made their judgment. Everything else was just theater, going through the motions of a process designed to look fair while being anything but. Back in the holding room, she sat down heavily. Fatima looked at her with concern. "You okay?" Amina shook her head. "They're not even really checking. They've already decided I'm lying." Rosa nodded knowingly. "Now you're learning, Mija. Now you see how it really works." But Amina's fear was transforming into something else. Anger. Cold, clear anger. She thought about her father, about everything he'd taught her. Marcus Hassan didn't raise his daughter to accept injustice quietly. She closed her eyes and heard his voice in her head, from all those times he'd come home from deployment and they'd talk late into the night. "Stay strong, Amina. Think clearly. Panic is the enemy. Clear thinking wins battles." She took a deep breath, opened her eyes, and started observing. She noticed which officers seemed sympathetic, which ones were just doing a job, which ones seemed to enjoy the power they had over desperate people. She listened to the other women's stories, learning the patterns, understanding the system. Her fingers found the American flag pinned still on her jacket, the one thing they hadn't taken from her. She held it, and for a moment she let herself cry. Not loud, sobbing tears, but quiet ones that slid down her cheeks as she thought about her father, about her mother who'd fought so hard to get to this country, about everything America was supposed to represent. Then she wiped her eyes and straightened her shoulders. If they thought she was going to break, they were wrong. Marcus Hassan's daughter was a fighter. Meanwhile, 30 miles away, General Marcus Hassan pulled into the parking lot of Lincoln High School, his uniform crisp despite the chaotic last hour. He'd driven here on autopilot, his military training keeping him functional while his heart screamed. Principal Kowalski met him at the entrance, wringing his hands. "General Hassan, I am so sorry. I tried to stop them. I told them she was a model student, that there had to be a mistake." Marcus's voice was controlled, but there was steel underneath. "Tell me exactly what happened. Every detail." Kowalski led him to his office and recounted the whole thing. The agents arriving without warning. The vague paperwork they'd flashed. Amina's protests. The handcuffs in the parking lot. Students filming everything. Marcus listened, his jaw tightening with every word. "Her locker," he said suddenly. "I need access to her locker." They walked through the now quiet hallways. School had been dismissed early after the incident, but a few teachers remained, and they watched Marcus with sympathy and horror. At Amina's locker, Marcus found her backpack. Inside, among textbooks and notebooks, he found what he was looking for. In her AP government binder, tucked in a plastic sleeve, was a photocopy of her birth certificate. Amina had put it there for her college applications. Minneapolis General Hospital. Born January 15th. Parents, Marcus Hassan and Faduma Hassan. Weight, 7 pounds, 3 ounces. A perfect, healthy, American-born baby girl. Marcus stared at that piece of paper and for a moment he was back in that hospital room 16 years ago. Fatuma exhausted but glowing, cradling their newborn daughter. The nurse asking what they wanted to name her. Fatuma looking at him with such love. Amina. Means trustworthy, faithful. She will be faithful to everything good in this world. And Marcus, overwhelmed with joy, agreeing immediately. They'd filled out the birth certificate together, Fatuma's hand shaking slightly from exhaustion, both of them so full of hope for their daughter's future. He pulled out his phone and called Colonel Patricia Okafor. She answered immediately. Marcus, where are you? He explained about the birth certificate, about everything Kowalski had told him. Patricia's response was professional but tinged with anger. Okay, that's good. We have documentation. But Marcus, you need to understand something. Even with proof, ICE has wide discretion during what they call status verification. They can hold her for 24 to 48 hours just to run their checks. Marcus felt his frustration boiling over. Patricia, I've served this country for 25 years. I've fought in wars, led soldiers, made decisions that saved American lives. And they're treating my daughter like a criminal? Like she doesn't belong here. Patricia's voice was gentle but firm. I know. It's wrong, it's unjust, and we're going to fight it. But you need to listen to me carefully. Going in there with your rank, making demands, trying to use your position to intimidate them, it won't work. They're a civilian agency. They don't answer to the military. If anything, they'll dig in harder, claim you're trying to use undue influence. Marcus wanted to argue, wanted to pull rank, wanted to use every ounce of power and authority he'd earned over 2.5 decades of service. But Patricia was right and he knew it. This wasn't a military operation. He couldn't command his way out of this. So what do I do? He asked and hated how helpless he sounded. Patricia's response was immediate. You do what you do best. You strategize. Meet me at the ICE facility. Bring every document we can find. And Marcus? Remember who you are. You're not just a general. You're a father fighting for his child. That matters more than any rank. Marcus closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and nodded even though she couldn't see him. 30 minutes. He hung up and stood in the empty hallway of his daughter's school, holding her backpack, looking at her debate team trophy in the display case nearby. First place, state championship. He remembered that day, watching her argue with such passion and precision about equal protection under the law. She'd been magnificent. A memory hit him, vivid and painful. Amina at 6 years old, sitting on his shoulders during his promotion ceremony to brigadier general. She'd been so excited, wearing a little dress her mother had made, waving a tiny American flag. After the ceremony, she touched his new star insignia with awe. Daddy, you're so important now. He'd knelt down to her level, cupped her face in his hands. No, baby. You're what's important. Everything I do to make this country better for you. He'd meant it. Every deployment, every sacrifice, every moment away from his family, it had all been in service of an ideal. An America where his daughter could grow up safe, free, with opportunities he'd never had. And now that same country was treating her like she didn't belong. The irony was bitter enough to choke on. Marcus straightened his uniform, squared his shoulders, and headed for his car. His resolve hardened with every step. I'm getting my daughter back today, he said to himself. Not a hope. Not a wish. A mission objective. And General Marcus Hassan had never failed a mission in his life. At the ICE facility, Marcus met Patricia in the parking lot. She was already there, dressed in her own military uniform, a colonel's eagles gleaming on her shoulders. Patricia Okafor was brilliant, sharp as a knife, with the kind of legal mind that could find loopholes in ironclad contracts. She was also Nigerian-American, and she understood intimately the kind of discrimination they were fighting. You ready? She asked, her expression grim. Marcus nodded. Let's go get my daughter. The front desk of the ICE facility was staffed by a heavy-set officer who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Marcus approached, his military bearing impossible to miss. I'm General Marcus Hassan. My daughter, Amina Hassan, was brought here approximately 3 hours ago. I'm here to secure her immediate release. The officer barely glanced up. Detainee processing is in progress. You'll need to wait. Marcus felt his jaw clench. I'm not waiting. My daughter is a United States citizen. This is unlawful detention. The officer finally looked at him, taking in the uniform, the stars on his shoulders. For a moment, Marcus thought he saw a flicker of respect. But then the man's expression hardened into bureaucratic indifference. Sir, I understand your concern. But your military rank doesn't have jurisdiction here. This is a civilian immigration matter. Patricia stepped forward smoothly, her legal training evident in every word. We're here to formally request the immediate release of Amina Hassan, a natural-born U.S. citizen, who has been unlawfully detained without probable cause. She slid a folder across the desk. Here is her birth certificate, social security card, and all relevant documentation proving her citizenship status. We expect her release within the hour. The desk officer opened the folder, glanced at the documents and then set them aside. This will need to be processed through our verification system. Standard protocol is 24 to 48 hours. Marcus's control was slipping. 24 to 48 hours? My daughter is 16 years old. She's terrified. She's done nothing wrong. You have the documentation right there. The officer's expression didn't change. Sir, I don't make the rules. I'm telling you the procedure. You can wait here or come back tomorrow. Marcus leaned forward, and his voice dropped to a tone that had made enemy combatants reconsider their choices. I want to speak to whoever authorized my daughter's detention. Right now. The officer reached for his phone, and Marcus knew he'd at least gotten through. Let me see if a supervisor is available. 10 minutes later, a woman emerged from the back offices. Agent Mills, according to her badge. She was in her 50s, white, with the kind of cold professionalism that came from decades in government service. Her expression was carefully neutral as she looked at Marcus and Patricia. I'm the supervising agent on duty. How can I help you? Marcus kept his voice level, but the fury underneath was unmistakable. You can start by releasing my daughter. Amina Hassan. 16 years old. U.S. citizen. Unlawfully detained. Mills gestured to a small conference room off the lobby. Let's discuss this privately. Inside the conference room, the three of them sat down at a cheap laminate table. Mills folded her hands. General Hassan, I understand you're upset. But we're following protocol for status verification. We received information suggesting possible fraudulent documentation. Marcus's voice was ice cold. What information? From whom? My daughter was born in Minneapolis General Hospital. I have her birth certificate. What possible basis do you have for detaining her? Mills's expression remained maddeningly calm. I can't discuss the specifics of our intelligence. But we have protocols for cases where citizenship status is in question. We'll verify the documentation through our official channels. Patricia jumped in, her lawyer's mind cutting through the bureaucratic doublespeak. Agent Mills, let's be very clear. You've detained a U.S. citizen without probable cause, without a warrant, and without due process. That's a violation of the Fourth Amendment, the Fifth Amendment, and multiple federal statutes. If you don't release her immediately, we'll be filing a lawsuit that will make national headlines. Mills's eyes flickered with something, maybe concern, maybe annoyance. Colonel Okafor, we've been doing this job for a long time. We know the law. We're not violating anyone's rights. We're simply verifying status, which is within our legal authority. Marcus slammed his hand on the table, making both women jump. She's a child. My child. And you have her locked up like a criminal based on what? Her name? Her religion? The color of her skin? Mills stood up, her professionalism cracking slightly. General Hassan, I understand you're emotional, but threatening language will not expedite this process. Your daughter will be processed according to our standard procedures. You'll be notified when the verification is complete. That's all I can tell you. She moved toward the door, clearly done with the conversation. Marcus stood too, his full height and bearing making the small room feel even smaller. Agent Mills, I have fought for this country. I have bled for this country. I have buried soldiers who died defending this country's ideals. And right now, watching you dismiss my daughter's constitutional rights, I'm wondering what the hell I was fighting for. Mills paused at the door, and for just a second, her mask slipped. There was something in her eyes, maybe guilt, maybe discomfort. But then it was gone, replaced by bureaucratic stone. I'm sorry you feel that way, General. But my hands are tied. Protocol is protocol. You're welcome to wait here, but I can't promise when processing will be complete. She left, and the door closed with a soft click that sounded like a prison gate slamming shut. Patricia put a hand on Marcus's arm. We need to leave before you say something that makes this worse. Marcus was shaking with rage. Patricia, they're not going to release her. You saw that woman's face. They've made up their minds. Patricia pulled him toward the door. I know. Which means we need to change tactics. Come on. Outside in the parking lot, Marcus leaned against his car, trying to control his breathing. He'd been in firefights, had made life-or-death decisions under enemy fire, had stayed calm when missiles were incoming. But this helplessness was worse than any combat he'd ever experienced. Patricia stood next to him, thinking, Marcus, they're not responding to reason or documentation. Which means we need leverage. Marcus looked at her. What kind of leverage? Patricia's expression turned calculating. The kind that comes from public pressure. Media attention. Congressional oversight. If they won't listen to a father, maybe they'll listen to a general whose story goes viral. Marcus straightened up. You're talking about going public. Patricia nodded. I'm talking about turning this into the national scandal it deserves to be. Your daughter isn't just any teenager. She's the daughter of a decorated military officer. This is a story that will resonate. Marcus thought about Amina, about how private she was, how this kind of attention would affect her. But then he thought about her sitting in that facility, scared and alone, and the decision became easy. Do it. Contact every media outlet you can think of. I want cameras here. I want the whole country watching what they're doing to my daughter. Patricia pulled out her phone, already scrolling through contacts. I know a reporter at the national news. She's been covering immigration issues. She'll jump on this. Marcus pulled out his own phone and made a different call. General Bradley, his commanding officer and mentor, answered immediately. Marcus, what's going on? I got a message you left the briefing. Marcus explained everything, and Bradley's response was a string of curses that would have made a drill sergeant blush. They detained Amina? That sweet kid who helped organize the 4th of July celebration on base last year? Are they out of their minds? Marcus felt a grim satisfaction at Bradley's outrage. Sir, I need your help. I need you to make some calls. Department of Homeland Security, anyone you know with oversight authority. Bradley didn't hesitate. Consider it done. And Marcus? I'm so sorry you're dealing with this. We're going to get her out. Marcus thanked him and ended the call. Then he made another call, this one to Congresswoman Diane Morrison. She'd served on the Armed Services Committee, knew Marcus's record, and more importantly, sat on the committee that oversaw immigration enforcement. Morrison answered on the third ring. General Hassan? This is a surprise. Marcus kept his voice steady. Congresswoman, I need your help. ICE has unlawfully detained my 16-year-old daughter despite clear evidence of her U.S. citizenship. I believe this is a case of racial profiling, and I need congressional oversight. There was a sharp intake of breath. Your daughter? Amina? I met her at the military family event last month. She's brilliant. Give me all the details. Marcus laid it out, and Morrison's response was immediate and fierce. This is exactly the kind of overreach my committee has been investigating. I'm making calls right now. In general? I'm sorry this is happening to your family. This isn't what America is supposed to be. Marcus felt something loosen in his chest. Finally, people were listening. Finally, the machine was starting to move. He looked back at the bland concrete building where his daughter was being held. Somewhere in there, Amina was waiting, wondering if anyone was coming for her. Marcus made a silent promise. I'm coming, baby. Daddy's coming. And I'm bringing hell with me. If you think this story is important, if you think what's happening to Amina matters, hit that subscribe button right now. Because what happens next is going to expose a system that's broken at its core, and you won't want to miss a single moment. Here's my question for you. Do you think General Hassan should have gone public immediately, or should he have tried to work within the system longer? What would you do if this was your child? Drop your answer in the comments because this conversation needs to happen. And trust me, the storm that's about to hit this ICE facility is going to change everything. General Marcus Hassan sat in his car in the ICE facility parking lot, phone pressed to his ear, watching the building where his daughter was being held like it was enemy territory. Because that's exactly what it had become. He scrolled through his contacts and found the name he was looking for. General William Bradley. His commanding officer, his mentor, and more importantly, a man with connections that reached into every corner of the federal government. Bradley answered on the second ring. Marcus? Weren't you supposed to be in the strategic ops briefing? Marcus's voice was tight. Sir, I need your help. It's about Amina. There was immediate concern in Bradley's response. Bradley had known Amina since she was a little girl. She'd been on base 100 times, attending military family events, helping organize the 4th of July celebration last year, charming every officer she met with her intelligence and warmth. What's wrong? Is she okay? Marcus laid it out in clean military precision. The detention. The handcuffs. The refusal to verify her citizenship despite documentation. The bureaucratic stonewalling. With each sentence he could hear Bradley's breathing getting heavier, his anger building. When Marcus finished, there was a long silence. Then Bradley exploded. They did what to Amina? That kid's been on base 100 times. She volunteered at the commissary for God's sake. She helped my wife organize the charity drive. Marcus felt a grim satisfaction at Bradley's outrage. Sir, they won't listen to me. They don't care about documentation. Agent Mills basically dismissed us. Bradley's voice turned hard, the voice of a man who'd commanded thousands of soldiers and wasn't used to being told no. The hell with that. I'm making calls right now. Department of Homeland Security owes me favors. The secretary and I go way back. Marcus, I'm getting your daughter out of there if I have to drive down there myself. Marcus closed his eyes. Thank you, sir. Bradley's voice softened. Marcus, you're like a son to me. Amina is family. We take care of family. I'll call you back in 15 minutes. The line went dead and Marcus allowed himself one moment of hope. But Bradley was right, the wheels of government turned slowly, even with a general pushing them. He needed more pressure. He needed the kind of pressure that couldn't be ignored or delayed. He pulled up another contact. Angela Chin. She was an investigative reporter for one of the major national news networks, someone Marcus had worked with years ago when she'd done a piece on military families dealing with PTSD. She was tough, fair, and most importantly, she had a nose for stories that mattered. The phone rang 3 times before she picked up. General Hassan? This is unexpected. What can I do for you? Marcus didn't waste time on pleasantries. Angela, I have a story for you. My 16-year-old daughter, a United States citizen, was detained by ICE agents today. Pulled out of her high school in handcuffs. They're holding her at a processing facility despite having clear documentation of her citizenship. I believe this is racial profiling. There was a sharp intake of breath, then the sound of Angela's reporter instincts kicking into high gear. Wait, your daughter? Amina? The debate champion? Marcus was surprised she remembered. You have a good memory. Angela's response was immediate. General, I did a whole segment on military families last year. Your daughter was one of the kids I interviewed for background. She's brilliant. And you're telling me ICE detained her? A decorated general's daughter? An American citizen? When can we talk? Are you at the facility now? Marcus felt the machine starting to turn. I'm in the parking lot right now. Angela was already moving, he could hear it in her voice. Stay there. I'm 20 minutes away. I'm bringing a camera crew. This is exactly the kind of story that needs to be told. General, we're going to shine a light on this that they can't ignore. Marcus hung up and immediately dialed another number. Congresswoman Diane Morrison. She represented a district that included Fort Bragg and more importantly, she sat on the House Oversight Committee that had jurisdiction over immigration enforcement. Morrison answered with her characteristic directness. General Hassan, to what do I owe the pleasure? Marcus gave her the same briefing he'd given Angela, clinical and precise despite the rage burning in his chest. Morrison's response was pure fury. They detained Amina? I met that girl at the Military Family Appreciation event last month. We talked about her plans to study civil rights law. She was one of the most impressive young people I've ever met. And they have her in handcuffs. Marcus appreciated that everyone who'd met Amina remembered her. It spoke to who she was, how she affected people. Congresswoman, I need congressional oversight on this. This is unlawful detention and I believe it's part of a pattern of racial profiling. Morrison didn't hesitate. General, this is exactly the kind of overreach we've been investigating. I've got case files full of similar incidents. U.S. citizens detained based on nothing more than their appearance or their names. I'm calling an emergency hearing. And I'm putting the director of ICE on notice that he'd better have answers. She paused and her voice gentled slightly. Marcus, I'm so sorry this is happening to your family. This isn't what America is supposed to be. We're going to fix this. Marcus thanked her and ended the call. He looked at Patricia, who'd been listening to all of this from the passenger seat. The machine is moving, he said. Patricia nodded slowly. It is. But Marcus, you need to understand something. Once media gets involved, this becomes a political firestorm. Your life, Amina's life, it's all going to be under a microscope. Are you ready for that? Marcus thought about Amina sitting in that detention facility, scared and alone, while bureaucrats hid behind protocols and procedures. He thought about every other family who didn't have a general's rank or a congresswoman's direct line. He thought about what his wife Faduma would have said. She'd have been furious at the injustice, but she'd also have been proud that they were fighting back. Good, Marcus said, his voice cold and determined. Let it burn. Let the whole country see what they're doing. Because if this can happen to my daughter, It's happening to families who don't have the resources to fight back. And that ends now. Patricia studied his face for a moment, then nodded. All right then. Let's go to war. She started making her own calls, reaching out to civil rights organizations, other lawyers, anyone who could add pressure to the system. Marcus watched the ICE facility, and for the first time since he'd gotten that phone call, he felt like he was doing something. Not just reacting but attacking. It was a feeling he knew well from combat. The best defense was overwhelming offense. Inside the detention facility, Amina had lost track of time. There were no windows in the holding room, no clocks, nothing to mark the passage of hours except the slow, agonizing drag of waiting. She'd been there for what felt like an eternity but was probably only 4 or 5 hours. Her conversation with Fatima had evolved from frightened exchanges to something deeper. Real friendship forged in the crucible of shared injustice. Fatima told her story in quiet, halting sentences. She'd fled Guatemala when she was 3 years old. Her parents had run from gang violence, from a neighborhood where saying no to the cartels meant death for your whole family. They'd made the desperate journey north, crossing the border with nothing but the clothes on their backs and hope for a better life. Fatima had grown up in Texas, attended American schools, dreamed American dreams. She spoke English fluently, Spanish with an American accent that made her grandmother laugh. She'd never been back to Guatemala. Didn't remember it at all. As far as her heart was concerned, she was American in every way that mattered. Except the one way the law cared about. At least you have proof, Fatima said, her voice small. You have a birth certificate, papers, a father who can help. I have nothing. When they deport me, I'll be going to a country I don't even remember. I don't know anyone there anymore. My whole life is here. Amina felt her throat tighten. They can't deport you. You were a child when you came here. This is your home. Fatima smiled sadly. You'd think that would matter, wouldn't you? Amina realized something that made her anger burn even hotter. This wasn't just about her. This system was broken for everyone. She was privileged enough to have documentation, to have a father with rank and resources. But what about Fatima? What about all the other people caught in this machinery of bureaucracy and fear? Another woman joined their conversation. Sarah was in her late 20s with light skin and brown hair. She could have passed for white if you didn't look too closely, didn't hear her last name. Martinez. That's all it had taken. I've been here 2 days, Sarah said, her voice hollow with exhaustion. I showed them my U.S. passport, my driver's license, my birth certificate from Arizona. They keep saying there's a flag in the system that they need to verify. But I think they just don't believe me because my parents are from Mexico. Amina shook her head in disbelief. You have a passport and they still won't release you? Sarah laughed bitterly. They said passports can be forged. Can you believe that? A U.S. passport issued by the State Department, and they're claiming it might be fake. Rosa, the elderly woman who'd been there 3 days, added her own story. I've been a legal permanent resident for 40 years. 40 years. I have a green card. My children are citizens. My grandchildren were born here. But I forgot my green card at home when I went to the grocery store. ICE was doing a raid at the meatpacking plant nearby. They grabbed everyone who looked Hispanic. And now I'm here, and my family doesn't even know where I am because they won't let me make a phone call. As Amina listened to these stories, something shifted inside her. The fear was still there, but it was being overwhelmed by something stronger. Purpose. These women needed help. They needed someone to fight for them. And while she was stuck here, she could at least do something. She stood up, and her voice carried across the holding room. Listen to me. All of you. We all have rights. Citizen or not, we have rights. The Fifth Amendment guarantees due process. The Sixth Amendment guarantees legal representation. They can't just hold us indefinitely without charges. Some of the women looked up with hope in their eyes. Others looked skeptical, beaten down by a system that had taught them their rights were just words. Amina continued, her debate training kicking in. I know it feels hopeless. I know they make us feel powerless. But we're not. We need to document everything. Every interaction, every denial of our rights, every moment they violate protocol. Because this isn't over. For any of us. She started moving through the room, talking to each woman, learning their names, their stories. Maria, who'd been separated from her 2 young children. Chin, who'd lived in the U.S. for 20 years and owned a restaurant. Guadalupe, who was 8 months pregnant and terrified. Each story broke Amina's heart a little more and hardened her resolve. She wished she had paper, something to write on. She was trying to memorize everything, but there were so many details. An older guard had been watching this. Officer Janet Williams was in her 60s, a black woman with kind eyes and a face that had seen too much suffering. She'd worked at this facility for 10 years, and every year it got harder to reconcile what she did with who she wanted to be. There was something about this girl, this Amina, that reminded her of her own granddaughter. Same age, same fire, same belief that the world could be better if you just fought hard enough for it. Williams waited until the other guards were distracted, then approached Amina quietly. "You remind me of my granddaughter," she said softly. "She's got that same spirit. That same belief in justice." Amina looked up at her, trying to read whether this was a trick. Williams pulled a small notepad and pen from her pocket. "This isn't right. What they're doing to you, to all these women, it isn't right. Document everything. Names, times, what they said to you. Exact words if you can remember them." She pressed the notepad into Amina's hands. "I could lose my job for this. But some things are more important than a paycheck." Amina felt tears spring to her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. Williams patted her shoulder. "You fight, honey. You fight for all of them. Because you've got something most of these women don't. You've got a voice people will listen to. Use it." Amina opened the notepad and started writing furiously. Every detail she could remember from the moment the agents walked into her school. The time they arrived. What Agent Brennan had said. The refusal to let her call her father. The dismissive processing officer. The comments she'd overheard about Somali names and fake documents. She documented each woman's story in the holding room. Names, countries of origin, how long they'd been detained, whether they'd been allowed phone calls or access to lawyers. Her hand cramped from writing, but she didn't stop. This was something. In a situation where she'd felt completely powerless, this was action. This was evidence. This was ammunition for whatever fight was coming. She thought about her father, about everything he'd taught her about military strategy. Intelligence gathering was crucial. Know your enemy. Document their movements. Build your case. She was doing that now. But as the hours continued to drag on with no word, no update, no indication that anyone was coming for her, Amina felt her composure cracking. She'd been strong for so long, projecting confidence she didn't quite feel, helping the other women when she was just as scared as they were. She excused herself, moved to a corner of the holding room where she could have a moment of privacy, and let herself break down. Just for a minute. Just long enough to release the pressure that was building in her chest. Tears slid down her face silently. She pressed her hand against the concrete wall, cool and impersonal, and whispered into the empty space. "Dad, where are you?" It wasn't a question she expected an answer to. It was just the cry of a 16-year-old girl who wanted her father, who needed to believe that someone was fighting for her out there in the world beyond these walls. What Amina didn't know was that at that exact moment, a news van was pulling into the parking lot of the ICE facility. Angela Chin stepped out, followed by her camera crew, her producer, and a satellite truck that would allow them to go live immediately. She'd made calls on the drive over, reaching out to her network's national desk, pitching the story. Decorated military general's daughter, U.S. citizen, detained by ICE despite clear documentation. The national desk had greenlit it immediately. This was the kind of story that cut through the noise. Angela spotted General Hassan standing next to his car, still in his military uniform. The optics were perfect and she hated herself a little for thinking that way, but it was true. A black American general in full uniform, fighting to free his wrongfully detained daughter. This was going to resonate. She approached him with her hand extended. "General Hassan, thank you for calling me. Are you ready to do this?" Marcus shook her hand, his grip firm. "Whatever it takes to get my daughter out of there." Angela's cameraman was already setting up. "We're going to do this live. I want the facility in the background. I want people to see where they're holding her. You tell Amina's story. You tell the country what happened today." Marcus nodded. He'd given briefings to press before, but never like this. Never when it was personal. Never when his daughter's freedom hung in the balance. The camera's red light came on. Angela looked into the lens with the practiced ease of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. "This is Angela Chin reporting live from an ICE detention facility where a shocking story is unfolding. I'm here with General Marcus Hassan, a decorated U.S. military officer with 25 years of service. General Hassan's 16-year-old daughter, Amina, a United States citizen, was detained this morning by ICE agents and is currently being held inside this facility despite documentation proving her citizenship. General, tell us what happened." Marcus looked into the camera, and when he spoke, his voice was controlled, but you could hear the emotion underneath. Raw and real. "This morning, my daughter Amina was pulled out of her high school by ICE agents. She's 16 years old. She was born in Minneapolis General Hospital. She's never left the United States. She's a straight-A student, captain of her debate team, and she dreams of becoming a civil rights attorney. They handcuffed her in front of her classmates, and they brought her here. Angela's questions were sharp, precise. You have documentation of her citizenship? Marcus pulled out the birth certificate copy. Right here. Minneapolis General Hospital. January 15, 16 years ago. I've presented this to ICE officials. They claim they need 24 to 48 hours to verify. My daughter is an American citizen being held against her will without cause. That's unlawful detention. That's a violation of her constitutional rights. Angela turned back to the camera. General Hassan has served this country for 25 years. 3 tours in Iraq, 2 in Afghanistan, decorated for valor and strategic excellence. And today his American-born daughter is being detained by the very country he's sworn to protect. We reached out to ICE for comment, but have not received a response. We'll continue to follow this story as it develops. The camera light went off, and Angela immediately pulled out her phone. That's going out live right now. And I'm betting within 10 minutes social media is going to explode. She was right. Within 5 minutes the clip was trending on Twitter. Within 10 minutes #FreeAmina was spreading across platforms. People were sharing it, commenting, expressing outrage. The story had everything. A sympathetic victim, a clear injustice, a father's desperate fight, and the uncomfortable question of whether any family was safe from government overreach. The American Civil Liberties Union tweeted their support. Military family advocacy groups rallied. Immigration rights organizations added their voices. Inside the facility, Agent Mills was in her office when her phone started ringing. Her supervisor. Then her supervisor's supervisor. Then someone from the Department of Homeland Security headquarters. Each call more frantic than the last. What the hell is happening down there? Is there a general's kid in your facility? Why are we trending on social media? Why is there a news crew outside? Mills felt her stomach drop. She pulled up Twitter on her computer and saw the hashtag. Saw the clip of General Hassan in his uniform, medals gleaming, talking about his daughter. She called for Brennan and Rodriguez immediately. When they entered her office, she turned her computer screen toward them. Is this the Hassan girl you brought in? Brennan went pale as he watched the clip. Rodriguez closed his eyes. Oh no. Mills's voice was ice cold. You told me this was routine status verification. You said there were flags in the system. You didn't mention her father was a goddamn general. Brennan stammered, trying to salvage the situation. How was I supposed to know? She's just a kid. Somali name. Refugee community. We've seen fraud cases before. Rodriguez, to his credit, spoke up. I told you something didn't feel right about this one. She knew her rights. She had answers for everything. This isn't routine. Mills was already on the phone with her legal team. We need to review the Hassan case immediately. Pull everything. I want to know exactly what documentation we have and what basis we had for detention. Brennan was still trying to defend himself. We had intelligence. A tip about students at that school. Mills whirled on him. What tip? From whom? Show me the paperwork. Brennan's silence was damning. There was no tip. There was no intelligence. There was just a Somali name, a Muslim girl in a hijab, and Brennan's assumptions. Rodriguez leaned against the wall looking sick. This is bad. This is really bad. If she really is a citizen, if we detained her without cause, we're looking at a massive lawsuit. Constitutional violations. Civil rights violations. Mills's phone rang again. This time it was the director of ICE himself. She answered, and everyone in the room could hear the yelling even though the phone wasn't on speaker. When the call ended, Mills looked at both agents. We're in damage control mode. The director wants an immediate review of this case. And he wants answers for why a U.S. citizen was detained without probable cause. She pointed at Brennan. You're suspended pending investigation. Rodriguez, you're writing a full report on this incident. Every detail. I want it on my desk in an hour. But even as Mills tried to get control of the situation, she knew it was too late. The story was out there. The country was watching. And somewhere in this facility, a 16-year-old girl was sitting in a holding room, unaware that the entire world was rallying to her defense. Mills pulled up the intake records for Amina Hassan. Looking at them now, with fresh eyes, she couldn't see a single legitimate reason for detention. A birth certificate number that checked out. A social security number that verified. A father who was a decorated general with a security clearance that required extensive background checks. This wasn't about documentation. This wasn't about fraud. This was about exactly what General Hassan had said. Racial profiling. A Somali name. A Muslim teenager. And assumptions that had just blown up in their faces. Mills made a decision. Get the Hassan girl processed for release. Now, I want her out of this facility within the hour. Brennan protested. But we haven't completed verification. Mills cut him off. The verification is complete. She's exactly who she says she is. And every minute she stays here is another nail in the coffin for this facility and everyone who works in it. She looked at the computer screen, at the hashtag still trending, at the comments rolling in by the thousands. People were angry. Really angry. And they should be, Mills thought bitterly. Because this was everything that was wrong with the system. The assumptions, the biases, the casual cruelty disguised as protocol. She'd been part of this machine for 20 years and right now she hated what it had become. Or maybe what it had always been and she'd just chosen not to see it. If you're watching this and your blood is boiling, if you're thinking about how wrong this is, hit that subscribe button. Because this story is about to reach its breaking point and you need to see how it ends. The question is, when systems fail us this badly, when the people in power abuse that power, what's our responsibility as citizens? Do we stay silent or do we demand better? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Let's have this conversation. Because what happens next is going to force everyone in this facility to confront exactly what they've been doing. And trust me, the reckoning is going to be brutal. The news coverage spread like wildfire. Within an hour of Angela Chen's initial broadcast, every major network had picked up the story. Camera crews descended on Lincoln High School, interviewing students who'd witnessed Amina's detention. The footage they'd recorded on their phones, shaky and raw, played on loop across cable news. You could see Amina's face, tear-streaked and terrified, as agents led her away in handcuffs. You could hear her voice breaking as she pleaded that she was a citizen. Maria, Amina's best friend, stood in front of the cameras with tears streaming down her face. She'd been crying on and off since this morning, unable to process that her best friend had been taken like a criminal. Amina is the most patriotic person I know, Maria said, her voice thick with emotion. She loves this country. She wears an American flag pin every single day that her dad gave her. We were literally doing a presentation on constitutional rights today. The Fourth Amendment. Protection against unreasonable search and seizure. And then they just took her. Maria broke down completely, and her mother had to step in and wrap her arms around her daughter. The image of this teenage girl, sobbing for her detained friend, played across every screen in America. It was the kind of moment that cut through political divisions, that made people stop and really see what was happening. The debate coach, Mr. Richardson, appeared next. He was a calm, measured man who'd taught civics for 20 years, but even he couldn't hide his anger and distress. I want to show you something, Richardson said, pulling out his phone. This is from last month. Amina gave a speech at the state debate championship. Listen to this. He played a video clip. Amina stood at a podium, 16 years old but commanding the room with a presence beyond her years. Her voice was clear and passionate as she spoke about constitutional rights and equal protection under the law. The Fifth Amendment guarantees that no person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. Not some people. Not citizens only. No person. These protections exist because the founders understood that government power, unchecked, will always tend toward tyranny. The irony of those words, spoken just weeks before her own detention without due process, was not lost on anyone watching. Richardson's voice shook as he continued. This is who Amina is. A girl who believes in the promise of America, who studies its laws, who wants to make this country better. And this is how we treat her? By putting her in handcuffs and detaining her like a criminal? The clip of Amina's speech went viral on its own, shared millions of times with the caption, "She warned us." Then other military families started speaking out. The story had hit a nerve in the military community. If the daughter of a two-star general wasn't safe from wrongful detention, whose children were? Captain Jennifer Martinez, an Air Force pilot, gave a powerful interview. I've served this country for 15 years. My husband is deployed right now. We have 3 kids. And I'm looking at what happened to General Hassan's daughter and wondering, could that be my kids? My oldest has a Spanish last name. My middle child wears a hijab because she converted to Islam. Are they safe? Or could they be next? A Navy commander, David Park, whose parents had immigrated from Korea, added his voice. We ask our military families to sacrifice everything. Multiple deployments, time away from loved ones, the constant stress and danger. And in return we expect that our country will protect our children. that they'll be safe here while we're overseas fighting. But General Hassan's daughter wasn't protected. She was targeted. And that should terrify every military family in America. Congresswoman Diane Morrison didn't waste any time. Within 2 hours of the story breaking, she was in front of cameras issuing a statement that minced no words. What happened to Amina Hassan is a disgrace. It is a violation of her constitutional rights, a betrayal of her father's service, and a symptom of a broken system that has lost its way. I am calling for an immediate investigation into ICE's detention practices, particularly regarding the targeting of individuals based on racial or religious profiling. The House Oversight Committee will be holding emergency hearings, and I expect the director of ICE to testify under oath. The American Civil Liberties Union released their own statement within the hour. The unlawful detention of Amina Hassan is exactly the kind of constitutional violation we've been warning about for years. We are sending a team of lawyers to provide immediate legal representation, not just for Ms. Hassan, but for every detainee in that facility whose rights have been violated. This is not an isolated incident. This is a pattern of abuse that must end. The ACLU's involvement signaled that this was about to become a major legal battle with implications far beyond one 16-year-old girl. Outside the ICE facility, the Somali American community was mobilizing. Word had spread through mosques, community centers, and social media. Within hours, dozens of people gathered outside the building holding signs and chanting, "Let her go! Let her go!" Some held American flags. Others held signs that read, "We belong here too," and "Muslim Americans are Americans." A Somali community leader, Imam Hassan Yusuf, spoke to the growing crowd. "Amina Hassan is one of our children. But she is also America's child. Born here, raised here, loves this country with all her heart. And they treat her like an enemy? No. We will not accept this." The protest was peaceful but passionate. Parents held their children, many of them wearing hijabs, and you could see the fear in their faces. If Amina wasn't safe, were their kids safe? A local news crew interviewed a Somali American mother who was crying as she spoke. "My daughter is the same age as Amina. They go to different schools, but they could be friends. And I'm terrified. Every day I send my baby to school, and now I'm wondering, could they take her too? Just because of her name? Because of how she dresses? This is supposed to be America. This is supposed to be the land of the free." Back at the facility, Angela Chin approached General Marcus Hassan for a more in-depth interview. The earlier clip had gotten millions of views, but she wanted to give him space to really tell Amina's story, to make people understand what this meant. Marcus stood in his uniform, the facility looming behind him, and when he spoke, you could see him struggling to maintain his military composure while his heart was breaking. "My daughter is in there, scared and alone, for no reason other than her name and her faith," Marcus said, and his voice cracked just slightly on the word daughter. "Amina is 16 years old. She was born in Minneapolis General Hospital. I held her minutes after she was born. I've watched her grow into this incredible young woman. Smart, compassionate, driven. She volunteers at refugee centers. She tutors younger students. She wants to be a civil rights attorney because she believes in justice, believes in making this country better." Marcus paused, collecting himself. "I've served this country for 25 years. I've been deployed 6 times. I've led soldiers in combat. I've made decisions that cost lives and saved lives. And I did it all because I believed in America. I believed in the ideals we're supposed to stand for. Liberty, justice, equal protection under the law. But right now, standing here, knowing my daughter is behind those walls, I'm asking myself what I was fighting for. What good is my service if my own child can be detained without cause? If her constitutional rights mean nothing the moment someone sees her hijab and assumes she doesn't belong?" He looked directly into the camera, and the pain in his eyes was visceral. "This is not the America I fought for. This is not the America my wife dreamed of when she came here as a refugee, working so hard to build a life for our family. She died 3 years ago, and I promised her I would protect our daughter, give her every opportunity, make sure she knew she belonged here. And today I failed. Because I couldn't protect her from her own government." The interview clip went viral immediately, racking up millions of views in just hours. It was being shared across every platform, discussed on every talk show, analyzed by every political commentator. Inside the detention facility, something was shifting. The common room had a television, usually tuned to bland daytime programming that the guards controlled. But one of the detainees had managed to change the channel, and now the news coverage was playing. The women in the holding room, including Amina, could see it. They watched as reporters discussed her case. They saw the protests outside. They heard Congresswoman Morrison's statement. They watched Marcus's interview. Amina sat frozen, staring at the screen. That was her dad. Her strong, unshakable father who never let anyone see him vulnerable. And he was on national television, fighting for her with everything he had. Tears streamed down her face as she watched him speak about her, about his service, about the America he'd believed in. Fatima grabbed her hand, squeezing tight. "Your dad loves you so much," she whispered. Amina could only nod, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. But as the other detainees watched the coverage, a complex mix of emotions rippled through the room. There was hope, because if Amina's case was getting this much attention, maybe someone would start paying attention to all of them. Maybe the spotlight on this facility would expose all the injustices happening here. Rosa spoke up, her voice thoughtful. "If a general's daughter isn't safe from this, none of us are. But maybe, just maybe, her getting out will help all of us. Maybe people will finally see what's been happening here all along." Sarah nodded slowly. "They're talking about systemic problems. Constitutional violations. That's not just about Amina. That's about every single one of us in this room." But there was also fear. Because if someone with Amina's resources, with a father who had rank and power and media access, could be detained, what chance did the rest of them have? What happened when the cameras left and the protests died down? Would they still be here, forgotten and invisible? Chen, the restaurant owner who'd been detained for 3 days, voiced what several of them were thinking. "I'm happy for her. Really I am. She shouldn't be here. But I've been watching them talk about her being a US citizen like that's what makes this wrong. What about those of us who aren't citizens? Do we not deserve justice too? Do we not have rights?" It was a question that hung in the air, uncomfortable and necessary. Amina looked at Chen, at Fatima, at all the women who'd been kind to her in the worst hours of her life. "You do have rights," Amina said firmly. "Citizen or not, you have human rights. Constitutional protections. And if I get out of here, I'm not going to forget you. I promise you that." It was a promise she meant with every fiber of her being. This experience had changed her, stripped away any naive belief that the system worked fairly. If she got out, she would use her voice, use whatever privilege her citizenship and her father's rank gave her, to fight for everyone left behind. Outside, the pressure was becoming unbearable for the ICE facility. Agent Mills had been on the phone non-stop, fielding calls from superiors, from the director's office, from Homeland Security headquarters. Every conversation was some variation of "fix this now." The political calculus was simple. This was a public relations disaster that was getting worse by the minute. #FreeAmina was trending #1 worldwide. The clip of Marcus's interview had been viewed over 10 million times. Politicians from both parties were being asked to comment, and those who defended ICE's actions were getting destroyed on social media. Mills finally made the call. She summoned Marcus and Patricia back into the facility, this time to a proper conference room rather than the front desk dismissals they'd received before. When they entered, Mills was already there, looking like she'd aged 5 years in the past few hours. Her carefully maintained professional demeanor was cracking at the edges. Marcus and Patricia sat across from her, and the tension in the room was thick enough to cut. Mills started with a defensive posture, her voice clipped. "General Hassan, I want you to understand that we were following standard procedure. Status verification is within our legal authority when there are questions about documentation." Marcus's response was ice cold, each word precisely delivered. Detaining a United States citizen without probable cause is not standard procedure. It's a violation of civil rights. It's unlawful detention. And you know it. Patricia jumped in, laying out the legal case with surgical precision. "Agent Mills, let's be very clear about what happened here. You detained a minor U.S. citizen without a warrant, without parental notification, and without legitimate cause. That's a violation of the Fourth Amendment's protection against unreasonable search and seizure. You denied her access to counsel and her right to contact her parent, violations of the Sixth Amendment. And the circumstances of her detention, targeted based on her name and religious attire, constitute potential discrimination under the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. We're not just talking about an unfortunate error. We're talking about systematic constitutional violations." Mills tried to justify the decision. "We had a flag in the system. There were concerns about her documentation." Marcus leaned forward and his voice was deadly quiet. "A flag you placed there based on what? Her name? Her religion? The color of her skin? My daughter was born in Minneapolis General Hospital. I have her birth certificate, her social security card, her passport. What possible legitimate flag could exist in your system? Mills deflected, falling back on bureaucratic language. General, we see fraud cases regularly. People using stolen identities, forged documents. We have to verify. Marcus cut her off, his patience completely exhausted. Don't insult my intelligence. My daughter was targeted because of how she looks. Because her name is Amina Hassan instead of Amy Jones. Because she wears a hijab. You can hide behind procedure all you want, but we both know what this really is. Mills called for Agent Brennan to join them, needing someone else to share the blame. When Brennan entered the conference room, he looked like a man walking to his execution. He'd seen the news coverage. He knew how badly this had blown up. Mills gestured for him to sit. Agent Brennan explained to General Hassan and Colonel Okafor the basis for detaining his daughter. Brennan stammered, trying to construct a coherent justification. We received a tip. Intelligence suggesting that students at Lincoln High School might be using fraudulent documentation. We were following up on that intelligence. Marcus's eyes narrowed. What tip? From whom? Show me the report. Brennan's face went pale. The source was confidential. We protect our informants. Patricia pulled out her own phone, scrolling through documents. Funny thing, Agent Brennan. We've already submitted Freedom of Information Act requests for all intelligence reports related to Lincoln High School. Want to guess how many we found? 0. There is no tip. There is no intelligence. You made that up. The explosion that followed was controlled but devastating. Marcus stood up, his full height and military bearing making the small conference room feel even smaller. He leaned across the table toward Brennan, and when he spoke, every word was a hammer blow. Agent Brennan, I've interrogated enemy combatants with more respect than you showed my daughter. I've treated prisoners of war with more dignity than you showed a 16-year-old American girl. You put her in handcuffs. You terrified her. You violated every right she has. And for what? Because you saw a Muslim girl and made assumptions. Brennan couldn't meet his eyes. Patricia, still scrolling through her research, dropped another bomb. We've pulled your records, Agent Brennan. Over the past 3 years, you've initiated detention proceedings against 47 individuals. Want to guess how many of them had Muslim-sounding names? 39. That's 83%. Funny pattern for someone who claims to be following random tips. Mills actually looked shocked. She turned to Brennan. Is that true? Brennan opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. Those are legitimate cases. We found documentation issues in many of them. Patricia's smile was sharp. You found documentation issues after you detained them. Because you detained them first and looked for justification second. That's not law enforcement. That's profiling. The conference room fell silent except for the sound of Mills's ragged breathing. She was realizing just how bad this was, how much worse it could get. This wasn't just one wrongful detention. This was evidence of a systematic pattern of discrimination. The kind of pattern that led to Department of Justice investigations, to consent decrees, to careers ending and agencies being restructured. Rodriguez, who'd been standing silently by the door, finally spoke up. His voice was quiet but carried the weight of guilt. Sir, I should have stopped it. I knew something wasn't right about this one. Your daughter knew her rights. She had answers for everything. She asked for a warrant. She asked to call you. And I just went along with it because Brennan said it was routine. He looked at Marcus with genuine remorse. I'm sorry. That's not enough. I know it's not enough. But I'm sorry. Marcus studied Rodriguez for a long moment, then nodded slowly. At least you have the courage to admit it. He turned back to Mills. Here's what's going to happen now. You're going to release my daughter immediately. And then we're going to have a much longer conversation about accountability, about reform, and about making sure this never happens to another family. Mills, cornered and knowing she had no cards left to play, tried one last time for damage control. General Hassan, we'll release Amina immediately with our sincere apologies. This was an unfortunate misunderstanding. Marcus cut her off, his voice like steel. No. Stop calling it a misunderstanding. Stop hiding behind euphemisms. This was racial profiling. This was religious discrimination. This was a violation of my daughter's constitutional rights. Call it what it is. Patricia added, and just so we're clear, we're filing a formal complaint with the Department of Justice. We're filing a civil rights lawsuit. And we're going to make sure every detail of this case becomes public record. Mills nodded, defeated. Understood. I'll have Amina processed for release immediately. She left the room to make the arrangements, leaving Marcus and Patricia with Brennan and Rodriguez. The silence was heavy. Finally, Marcus spoke to both agents. I want you to understand something. My daughter will recover from this. She's strong. She has support. She has resources. But there are dozens of other people in your custody right now who don't have what she has. Families without generals for fathers, without lawyers on speed dial, without media attention. And they deserve the same justice. They deserve the same rights. Remember that. 20 minutes later, Amina was being processed for release. They returned her belongings, her phone with dozens of missed calls and messages, her wallet, her keys. An officer apologized mechanically, the kind of apology that's been mandated by supervisors rather than felt. Amina barely heard it. She was numb, exhausted, emotionally drained from the past 6 hours that had felt like a lifetime. Then she was walking down a hallway and at the end of it she saw him. Her dad, still in his uniform, his face a mixture of relief and anguish. Amina broke into a run. She didn't care that there were cameras, didn't care that ICE agents were watching, didn't care about anything except getting to her father. She crashed into him and Marcus wrapped his arms around her, holding her so tight it almost hurt. Both of them were crying tears of relief and rage and love. Dad, they wouldn't listen, Amina sobbed into his chest. I told them I'm a citizen. I showed them my ID. They just didn't care. Marcus kissed the top of her head, his own tears falling into her hijab. I know, baby. I know. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry I couldn't protect you from this. He pulled back slightly, cupping her face in his hands, looking at her like he needed to memorize every detail to confirm she was really here, really safe. It's over now. You're safe. I've got you. But even in that moment of reunion, Amina was thinking about the women she'd left behind. She pulled back from her father, wiping her eyes. Dad, there are others still in there. Fatima, she's 17, came here when she was 3, they're going to deport her to a country she doesn't even remember. Rosa, she's been here 3 days, she's a legal resident, they won't even let her call her family. Sarah has a US passport and they still won't release her. They need help too. Marcus looked at his daughter, this incredible young woman who'd just been through a traumatic ordeal and was already thinking about others, and felt a surge of pride so powerful it almost brought him to his knees. We'll help them, he promised. I swear to you we'll help them. Patricia was already making notes on her phone. I'll have ACLU lawyers here within the hour for everyone in that facility. As they walked toward the exit, the reality of what was waiting for them became clear. Camera crews everywhere. Protesters cheering. Media calling out questions. Angela Chin pushed to the front, microphone ready. Amina, how do you feel? What happened in there? Marcus moved to shield his daughter, but Amina gently touched his arm. She stepped toward the cameras and even though she was exhausted, even though she'd been crying moments before, she composed herself with a maturity beyond her years. I'm grateful to be free, Amina said, her voice steady. I'm grateful for my father, for Colonel Okafor, for everyone who fought for me. But there are dozens of women and girls still inside that facility who deserve the same justice. Fatima, who's lived in this country since she was 3 years old. Rosa, who's been a legal resident for 40 years. Sarah, who has a US passport. They deserve to be heard. They deserve to have their rights protected. What happened to me was wrong, but it's not unique. It's happening every day to people who don't have cameras watching, who don't have a general for a father. And that has to change. The cameras captured every word. This wasn't just the story of one girl anymore. Amina had just made it about something bigger. About a system that needed fixing. About justice that should extend to everyone, not just those with power and privilege. Marcus stood behind his daughter, his hand on her shoulder, and realized that this wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning. If this story is making you angry, if you're thinking about all the people who don't get rescued, who don't get their moment of justice, hit that subscribe button right now. Because what comes next, the fight to change this broken system, is something you need to see. The question I have for you is this. Amina got out because her father had rank, resources, and media connections. What about everyone else? What's our responsibility to the Fatimas and Rosas and Sarahs who are still detained, still waiting, still invisible? Drop your answer in the comments. This conversation matters. And Amina Hassan just made sure the whole country is finally paying attention. 1 week later, the world looked different. Not because anything had fundamentally changed overnight, but because sometimes it takes one story, one face, one injustice made visible, to crack open a conversation that's been waiting to happen. The news cycles had moved on to other stories as they always do, but the ripple effects of what happened to Amina Hassan were just beginning to reshape the landscape. Congress announced emergency hearings into ICE detention practices. The House Oversight Committee, led by Congresswoman Diane Morrison, issued subpoenas for ICE leadership, demanding answers about detention protocols, verification procedures, and the disturbing patterns of racial and religious profiling that Amina's case had exposed. The announcement came with a statement that pulled no punches. "We have a constitutional crisis when American citizens can be detained without cause based on nothing more than their names and their faith. This committee will get to the bottom of what happened, and we will ensure accountability." Agent Brennan was suspended pending a full investigation into his detention record. The 83% rate of targeting Muslim-sounding names wasn't just damning, it was evidence of systematic discrimination that the agency could no longer ignore. Agent Mills was quietly reassigned to a desk job in a regional office far from any detention facility, a bureaucratic way of removing her without the scandal of an outright firing. But the most surprising development came from Agent Rodriguez. He voluntarily came forward to testify about the internal culture at the facility. In a closed-door session with congressional investigators that later leaked to the press, Rodriguez described an environment where profiling wasn't just tolerated but encouraged. Quotas for detentions that incentivized agents to cast wide nets and ask questions later. Informal guidance to target certain communities. A culture where raising concerns about civil rights violations was seen as being soft, as not being a team player. His testimony was damning, and it was corroborated by other agents who'd been waiting for someone to speak up first. "I stayed silent for too long," Rodriguez told investigators. "I told myself I was just following orders, just doing my job. But that's what people always say when they're complicit in injustice. What happened to Amina Hassan woke me up. And I'm not going to be silent anymore." His testimony became a key piece of evidence in the broader investigation, and while it didn't absolve him of his role in Amina's detention, it represented something important. Someone from inside the system admitting the system was broken. Meanwhile, Amina returned to school. The morning she walked through those doors again, she was terrified. Not of ICE agents this time, but of how people would look at her, what they would say, whether she'd become some kind of spectacle. But when she entered her first period classroom, something unexpected happened. Her classmates stood up and applauded. It started with Maria, tears streaming down her face, clapping like her life depended on it. Then the rest of the class joined in. Then her teacher. The applause spread through the hallway as word got out that Amina was back. But Amina herself was different. Her friends noticed it immediately. She was quieter, more serious. The girl who used to crack jokes in the hallway and debate passionately about everything from school lunch policies to Supreme Court decisions now seemed to carry a weight that hadn't been there before. Maria tried to talk to her about it at lunch. "Are you okay? I mean, really okay?" Amina gave her a small smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'm alive. I'm free." That's more than a lot of people get. She'd been changed by 6 hours in a detention facility. Changed by meeting Fatima and Rosa and Sarah and all the other women whose stories she couldn't forget. Changed by the realization that the America she'd believed in, the one she'd studied and debated and loved, wasn't the America that existed for everyone. There was a gap between the ideal and the reality, and she'd fallen into that gap. Now that she'd climbed out, she couldn't pretend it didn't exist. Her college interview at Georgetown came the following week. Amina sat across from the admissions officer, a distinguished woman in her 50s who'd read about Amina's case in the news. "I have to say," the woman began carefully, "your application was already impressive. But given recent events, I'm curious how this experience has shaped your goals." Amina took a breath and spoke from her heart. "I want to be a civil rights attorney. I've wanted that for years. But now I understand why in a way I didn't before." She told the admissions officer about Fatima, about Rosa, about all the women still fighting for their freedom. "I got out because my father is a general. Because we had resources, connections, media attention. But there are thousands of people going through the same thing I went through, and nobody's coming for them. Nobody's holding press conferences or filing lawsuits or getting them on the news. They're invisible. And I can't unsee that now. I can't unknow what I know. So my mission isn't just about studying law anymore. It's about using whatever privilege I have, whatever platform I've been given, to fight for the people who don't have those things." The admissions officer listened intently, and when Amina finished she simply said, "I think you're exactly the kind of student Georgetown needs." Amina would receive her acceptance letter 3 weeks later, but by then she was already deep into the work that would define her future. The ACLU had reached out the day after her release, asking if she'd be willing to help with other cases. Amina said yes without hesitation. She spent her afternoons and weekends working with ACLU lawyers, sharing what she'd learned during her detention, helping them understand the system from the inside. She reviewed case files of other detainees, identifying patterns of abuse, documenting violations. She visited detention facilities, meeting with people who were going through what she'd gone through, telling them their stories mattered, that someone was listening. It was exhausting work, emotionally draining in ways that left her crying in her room at night. But it was also necessary. It was purpose. Some of the women she'd met in that holding room started getting help. Fatima's case was taken on by a team of pro bono immigration lawyers who'd been inspired by Amina's story. They argued that Fatima had been brought to the U.S. as a toddler, had grown up American in every meaningful way, and deserved protection under DACA and a pathway to citizenship. The media attention from Amina's case had shone a spotlight on cases like Fatima's, making it politically harder to simply deport young people who'd spent their entire lives in America. Rosa was finally released and reunited with her family after being separated for 3 agonizing days that had felt like a lifetime. Her granddaughter, who was Amina's age, hugged her grandmother and wept with relief. Rosa's family contacted Marcus to thank him, because they knew that if Amina's case hadn't gone viral, if the spotlight hadn't been turned on that facility, Rosa might have been there for weeks or months. Sarah's case was expedited and resolved when her passport was finally verified through proper channels, something that should have taken hours but had stretched into days because of bureaucratic indifference. 2 weeks after Amina's release, General Marcus Hassan sat in a congressional hearing room, still in his military uniform, facing a panel of representatives and senators. The room was packed with media, advocates, and families who'd experienced similar injustices. Marcus had testified before Congress before, but always about military operations, strategy, foreign policy. Never about his own daughter. Never about a system that had failed his family despite every advantage they had. Congresswoman Morrison led the questioning. General Hassan, in your own words, can you describe what happened to your daughter and what it revealed about our immigration detention system? Marcus spoke clearly, his military training keeping his emotions in check even as he recounted the nightmare of that day. He described the phone call from the school, the bureaucratic stonewalling at the facility, the hours of not knowing if his daughter was okay. And then he said something that cut to the heart of the issue. Members of Congress, I need you to understand something. I'm a 2-star general. I have rank, connections, resources. I could call my commanding officer, Congresswoman Morrison, the media. I could mobilize pressure that most families can't even imagine. And even with all of that, it took hours to get my daughter released. Hours of my American citizen child being held against her will. If a general can't protect his daughter, what about the families without power? Without connections? Without anyone to call? The hearing room was silent except for the sound of cameras clicking. Marcus continued, his voice getting stronger. What about the single mother working 2 jobs who can't take time off to fight the system? What about the immigrant family that's terrified to speak up because they're worried about retaliation? What about the kids like Fatima who've been here since they were toddlers and call America home, but don't have the paperwork to prove they belong? If my daughter, with every advantage, could be detained unlawfully, then nobody is safe. And that should terrify all of us. His testimony was powerful, unscripted, and deeply personal in a way that congressional hearings rarely were. It was covered extensively in the news, and it helped shift the conversation from Amina's individual case to the broader systemic issues. This wasn't just about one wrongful detention. This was about a system that had lost its way, that had forgotten that the people it processed were human beings with rights and dignity and families who loved them. The news coverage in the following days focused on policy discussions. What reforms were needed? How could oversight be improved? What training did ICE agents need to prevent profiling? Amina and Marcus did a joint interview with Angela Chin, sitting side by side, father and daughter united in their mission to turn trauma into change. Angela asked Marcus about his view of the country he'd served for so long. Marcus's answer was thoughtful and honest. This country has given me everything. I grew up poor in Detroit, and the military gave me education, purpose, a career I'm proud of. I wore this uniform with honor for 25 years. I still do. But loving your country means holding it accountable when it falls short of its ideals. We have to do better. We have to be better. That's not unpatriotic. That's the most patriotic thing we can do. Amina added her own perspective. I love America. I know that might sound strange after what happened to me, but it's true. I love what America is supposed to be. The constitutional protections, the idea that everyone deserves due process, that we're all created equal. And that's exactly why I can't stay silent when it doesn't live up to those ideals. Staying silent would mean accepting that some people don't deserve those rights. And I won't do that. Then they announced something they'd been working on privately. The Hassan Civil Rights Initiative, a foundation dedicated to helping families navigate immigration detention and providing legal support to those who couldn't afford it. Marcus was funding it with his own money and donations from military families and civil rights organizations that had rallied to support them. "We're going to make sure that what happened to Amina helps prevent it from happening to others," Marcus explained. "And when it does happen, because we know the system won't fix itself overnight, we're going to make sure those families have someone fighting for them." The first beneficiary of the Hassan Civil Rights Initiative was Fatima. With the foundation's help, she received pro bono legal representation from top immigration attorneys. They filed for a work permit, started the process toward citizenship, and gave Fatima something she hadn't had in years. Oh. The day Fatima received her work permit, she called Amina, sobbing with gratitude. "You didn't forget about us. You said you wouldn't, and you didn't." Amina, holding the phone with tears running down her own face, replied, "I could never forget you. Never. You helped me survive the worst day of my life. Now let me help you build a life here." They met up the following week, two teenage girls who'd been thrown together by injustice and had found friendship in the darkest of places. Fatima showed Amina her work permit like it was a treasure, which it was. It meant she could work legally, could start building a future, could breathe a little easier knowing deportation wasn't imminent. Marcus, meanwhile, had a private meeting with Officer Janet Williams, the guard who'd given Amina paper and pen to document her detention. He'd asked to meet her personally, wanting to thank the woman who'd shown his daughter kindness when she needed it most. They met at a coffee shop near the facility, Williams looking nervous about meeting with a general. But Marcus shook her hand warmly and bought her coffee. "You helped my daughter when you didn't have to," Marcus said simply. "You risked your job to give her a way to fight back. I wanted to thank you personally." Williams looked down at her coffee, uncomfortable with the praise. "I just did what was right. Or what should be standard, honestly. I got into this job because I wanted to help people. My husband was deported when I was younger, even though he'd been here since he was a kid. I thought working in the system I could make a difference. But somewhere along the way we lost sight of that. We started seeing numbers instead of people." She looked up at Marcus and there were tears in her eyes. "Seeing your daughter in there, seeing how scared she was but how brave she was being, helping the other women even though she was terrified herself, it reminded me why I took this job in the first place. I'm glad she's okay. And I'm glad what happened to her is making people pay attention." Marcus reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "Thank you, truly. You gave my daughter her voice back. That's a gift I can never repay." In the weeks that followed, changes started happening at the ICE facility where Amina had been detained. Not revolutionary changes, not overnight transformation, but progress. New training protocols were implemented focusing on civil rights, due process, and the importance of treating detainees with dignity. Mandatory sessions on implicit bias and racial profiling. Stricter oversight on detention decisions. A new policy requiring supervisory approval before detaining anyone claiming U.S. citizenship. Were these changes enough? No. Were they perfect? Far from it. But they were something. They were acknowledgement that the system had failed and needed to do better. 3 months after her detention, Amina stood on a stage at the state debate championship. The topic was civil disobedience and constitutional rights, and the irony wasn't lost on anyone in the room. Many of the judges and competitors knew her story. Her detention had been national news. But Amina wasn't there as a victim or a symbol. She was there as a competitor, doing what she loved, arguing the principles she believed in with every fiber of her being. Her speech was powerful in a way that transcended typical debate performances. She spoke about her experience, but not just as a personal story. She connected it to the long history of civil rights struggles in America. She quoted Frederick Douglass, Martin Luther King Jr., Cesar Chavez. She talked about the Japanese internment camps, about the civil rights movement, about every time America had failed its ideals and people had fought to make it better. "They tried to tell me I didn't belong here," Amina said, her voice ringing through the auditorium. "But this is my country. Born in Minneapolis, raised on American values, educated in American schools, dreaming American dreams. And I'll spend my life making it better, making it truly free for everyone, because that's what my mother would have wanted. That's what my father fought for. And that's what I'll fight for too." In the audience, Marcus sat in his full dress uniform, medals gleaming under the auditorium lights. Tears streamed down his face as he watched his daughter, this incredible young woman who'd taken the worst experience of her life and transformed it into purpose. He thought about Fatima, wished desperately that she could see Amina now. She would have been so proud. So proud of their daughter's strength, her compassion, her refusal to be broken by injustice. Memories flooded through him. Amina as a tiny baby, Fatuma singing Somali lullabies while he paced the floor at 2 in the morning. Amina as a toddler, taking her first steps toward him while he was home on leave, Fatuma laughing with pure joy. Amina at 6, sitting on his shoulders at his promotion ceremony, so excited that her daddy was a general. Amina at 13, holding Fatuma's hand in the hospital during those final days, being so brave even as her heart was breaking. And Amina now, 17, standing on that stage and turning her pain into power. The judges deliberated for 20 minutes before announcing their decision. When they called Amina's name as the winner, the auditorium erupted in applause. She accepted the trophy, holding it high, and the camera panned across the room, catching the faces of people who'd been moved by her words, who'd seen not just a debate performance but a declaration of purpose. The camera settled on an American flag hanging in the background, and for a moment, everything Amina had said crystallized in that image. The flag represented an ideal, a promise, and people like Amina who refused to let that promise be broken. After the championship, after the congratulations and photos and celebration, Amina sat down to record a video message. She wanted to speak directly to everyone who'd followed her story, who'd supported her, who'd been inspired or angered or moved by what happened. She wanted them to understand what she'd learned. The video was simple, just her sitting in front of a camera, speaking from her heart. "They tried to tell me I didn't belong here," she began, echoing her debate speech. "But this is my country. And I'll spend my life making it better, making it truly free for everyone. That's what my mother would have wanted. She fled Somalia to give me a chance at a better life. She came here legally, worked so hard, loved America with all her heart. And when she was dying, she made me promise to never take my opportunities for granted, to always fight for what's right. That's what my father fought for. He served this country for 25 years, putting his life on the line again and again because he believed in American ideals. And that's what I'll fight for too. Not the America that detained me, but the America that can be better. The America that lives up to its promises for everyone." The video ended with text appearing on screen, information that made Amina's story part of a much larger pattern. This story is inspired by real cases of U.S. citizens wrongfully detained by ICE. According to reports, over 1,500 U.S. citizens have been detained or deported since 2010. The number sat there, stark and undeniable. 1,500 American citizens. People who should have been protected by the very rights and laws that America claims to hold sacred. Detained, deported, separated from families, traumatized by their own government. Amina's case had gotten attention because her father was a general, because the media picked it up, because the circumstances were particularly egregious. But what about the other 1,500? What about the ones whose stories never made the news, whose families didn't have connections, whose suffering happened in silence? That was the question Amina wanted people to sit with. That was the question that should keep us all up at night. The Hassan family's story didn't end with Amina's release or even with the foundation they created. It continued in the lives they touched, the policies they helped change, the conversations they forced America to have about who deserves justice and why. Fatuma got her work permit and eventually her citizenship, graduating from college with honors and becoming an immigration attorney herself, dedicated to helping families like hers. Rosa lived to see her great-grandchildren born, finally able to rest easy knowing she wouldn't be separated from her family again. Sarah became an advocate for immigration reform, using her experience to educate others about the flaws in the system. And Amina? She went to Georgetown, studied civil rights law like she'd always planned, and spent her summers interning with the ACLU, the Hassan Civil Rights Initiative, and other organizations fighting for justice. She never forgot the women she met in that detention facility. Never forgot the fear, the uncertainty, the casual cruelty of a system that saw them as numbers instead of humans. And she dedicated her life to making sure their stories mattered, their rights were protected, their humanity was recognized. Marcus continued to serve, but with a new understanding of what service really meant. It wasn't just wearing the uniform or leading troops. It was standing up when the system failed, using whatever power you had to protect those who had none, and never staying silent in the face of injustice. He testified at more congressional hearings, advised on policy reform, and used his rank and reputation to keep pressure on agencies that needed to change. Together, father and daughter became symbols of something important. The idea that loving your country means demanding it be better. That patriotism isn't blind loyalty, but active engagement in making America live up to its promises. That the flag they both loved, the one Marcus had served under and Amina had worn on her lapel, represented an ideal worth fighting for, especially when the reality fell short. If this story moved you, if it made you think about justice and who deserves it and what we owe each other as fellow citizens and fellow humans, then subscribe to this channel right now. Because stories like this matter. They matter because they're true, because they're happening right now, because they force us to confront uncomfortable truths about the systems we've built and the people we've left behind. Don't just watch and move on. Engage with this. Share it. Talk about it. Let it change how you see the world. Here's my final question for you, and I really want you to think about it. What would you do if this happened to your family? If your child, your sibling, your parent was detained despite being a U.S. citizen? Would you have the resources to fight back like Marcus did? And more importantly, what's our responsibility to the families who don't have those resources? What's our responsibility to the Fatimas, the Roses, the Sarahs who are still fighting, still waiting, still hoping for justice? Drop your answer in the comments. Share your thoughts. Because this conversation, this difficult, necessary conversation about who we are as a country and who we want to be, that's where change begins. With people like you choosing to pay attention, choosing to care, choosing to demand better. Subscribe for more stories that matter, stories that challenge us to be better, to do better, to build the America we claim to believe in.